All right, so we've discussed some of the terminology and concepts, and I've given you some lecture notes and unpacked some of this material in videos. And now I want to get right down to the root of it. So you need to understand, before we go any further, that any argument can be taken apart. So you may think that these arguments are built on a foundation of absolute fact and knowledge. The field of philosophy that deals with knowledge and fact is called epistemology, and we'll get into that in a separate lecture. But for now, I just want to talk a little bit about dualism, specifically body-mind dualism. And you don't have to be a scholar of philosophy to know about this or to understand it. It basically breaks down in the following way. Are we purely material beings, or is there also a spiritual side to us too? We're not sure. There seems to be possibly a mix of both. We know that we have a material body that isn't here forever, but there does seem to be indication of potential longevity in other areas. For example, consciousness, which we know virtually nothing about. Energy in the mind, intention, and how it plays into modern physics and this sort of thing. So it isn't known whether we live in a material world or we live in a world of ideas. And what I mean by that is, if we were to look at the world only in terms of our 5 sensory perceptions, think about the movie The Matrix if you've seen it. The only input I have from this world arrives at my brain via my 5 senses. That's it. If I cut off access, if I can't see, hear, touch, taste, or smell, what do I experience? Nothing. There's absolutely nothing. I wouldn't be able to feel pain. I wouldn't be able to sense motion. I wouldn't be able to hear anything. Just, you wouldn't have any consciousness of any sort. So consciousness does seem to arise from the material being, but it's impossible for us to say, at least so far, that it is attached to it and not just connected to it in some way whereby it possibly separates at death, let's say. A spirit would travel to heaven. So this dualism has plagued philosophy since its inception. It goes all the way back to Plato, who talked about the forms, which is another topic we don't need to go into in painful detail. It is sufficient to point out that Plato was a dualist. He felt that the material world were imperfect representations of ideal forms that existed somewhere in the heavens. Aristotle did not agree with that. But if you move forward to much more recent philosophical history, you look at René Descartes, and you probably all recognize René Descartes from his famous quote, Je pense donc je suis. No? Cogito ergo sum? No? I think, therefore I am. Aha, yes. Now, some of you recognize that. See how much is lost in translation. Original French into Latin, and now into English and on bumper stickers all over the place. So that's another lecture too. All right, so I want you to think about the following dilemma. All of our arguments are supposedly based in fact and absolute certainty. All right, and so the reason that I'm having this lecture about the physical world and about dualism is I want to demonstrate something to you. I'm taking an ordinary object, like I have this flashlight. Now, I'm not concerned with how the flashlight works with the batteries and the electronic. None of that matters for this. All I'm concerned about is the flashlight as a material object, just as a solid object. That's it. And so what would you say, or what might you agree with me with, that some of the properties would be of this flashlight. Properties of the flashlight. You might say, well, it's solid, right? I can't pass through it. I have to go around it. It has weight to it. It's silver, so there's color. There are other dimensions, size. We could break it down into material, but those would be the big ones. So 2 of those would be incorrect. You would be completely wrong. One of them will probably surprise you. The first one would be weight, because this object doesn't actually weigh anything. If I were to cast this off into outer space and it was no longer within the proximity of a much larger object, the Earth, it would cease to be in its gravitational pull, and it would cease to give the illusion of having weight. Things don't really have weight. They sort of have a mass energy to them, maybe. The next thing that you would be incorrect about as far as properties of this flashlight would be the color. The flashlight itself has no color. In fact, nothing in the world actually has any color. It's wrong to say that things have color. If you think that it does have color, then I want you to take this to a laboratory, and I want you to take the silver out of it and show it to me. Not the silver paint or the silver dye. I want you to actually take silverness out of this material and show it to me. Obviously, you can't do that. The reason that you can't do that is because color is an illusion. The reason we perceive color is the way that our brains are set up. It has nothing to do with the exterior world other than a relationship to it. So when I look at this flashlight and I see silver, it's because the light waves in this room are bouncing off of the object at a certain frequency, so that when it enters my eye and goes down the optic nerve and into the brain, my brain translates that signal into the color silver. So people who are colorblind, as we say, are actually seeing the world in grayscale the way that it actually is. They just lack the ability to translate it into color the way that we do in our brains. Most animals, we think, translate the world into color, though we know not all of them do. It's suspected that it's on some degree of the grayscale, but who knows? So keep this in mind when you're arguing, because ultimately we don't even know what the world is made of. And so typically for philosophers, this puts us into 2 camps. We have the materialists, and these are the people who think the world is made of a separate material, matter. Like you learned in 6th grade, your teachers told you the wrong information. And they told you about the law of conservation of mass energy. Matter cannot be created or destroyed. It only changes form, right? And so that would be materialism. Even when matter changes form, it only becomes something else, right? The burning log becomes gas vapor and then goes up the chimney and then the gases. And so it never begins or ends. It only changes form. Okay? Maybe so. The idealist would say that is not true, that there is no such thing as matter, that all of this is nothing more than illusion. In the same way that the color silver is an illusion, the idealist would say, so is the property of solidity and dimension, etc. So we don't know which one is correct. All I would pose to you is that if you just learned that you were wrong about the property of color belonging to the flashlight, wouldn't you at least be willing to consider that you could also be wrong about the way that you're perceiving the other properties? And that's the essence of idealism. It doesn't establish anything so much as it provides a very good criticism or a critique of materialism. Both have good points. Both are just two different perspectives or two ways of viewing the world. So remember, everything that we think we know begins with our understanding of the world. And so if our understanding of the world is on tenuous ground that way, is it material? Is it idealism? Then any argument that you put together is always going to be able to be taken apart by someone who is aware of that. Okay. This is probably a good point for me to stop. All right.